Fifaliana mandrakariva trany ny arabanantsika manaraka ny fifampizarana momba ny fetin'ny ray indray eto amin'ny pejy zava-manahirany vehivavy fifampizarana faharoa iarahantsika amin'ny Pastora Gary ny androany araka ny resantsika omaly ny tantara izy hoe tao amin'ny fiangonana Misionery no mitombo sy ny lehibe sy nianatra teolojia fa rehefa nisy olana momba ny teolojia conservateur loatra sy fihetsiketsehana samy hafa ny tranga tamin'ny taona 1770 tany ho any tao amin'ilay seminera teolojika ny Fiangonana Loterana Misionery dia nanapa-kevitra izy miala tao mifindra amina Loterana, Fiangonana Loterana aty Amerika ihany izay azo lazaina hoe libéral kokoa. Fa mialohan'ny anohizantsika ny tantarany rehefa nifindra tamina Fiangonana Loterana Amerikana libéral kokoa izy dia ametraka fanontaniana aminy aloha izany fandray tamin'ilay nifampizarantsika omaly hoe inona moa ilay tena olany tamin'ilay tsy nahita zava-baovao soratana momba ny ilay rain'ny fiangonana Augustin intsony izany izy. Isan'ny zava-dehibe amin'ny andro iainantsika ankehitriny io indrindratsika loteranina ankehitriny na ny tsy loteranina koa ary satria lotera dia pretra augustiniana izy izany hoe ny teolojian'ny Augustin izany dia isan'ny namolavola ny teolojian'ny lotera ary ny papa izay vao nifidiana voatsy ela teo koa dia augustiniana koa izy ka araroantsika izany ny fananana anazy eto izay nanao fikarohana momba ny teolojian'ny Augustin hoe inona moa izany ny tena zavatra raina roa lehibe indrindra momba ny teolojian'io rain'ny fiangonana Augustin io anatin'izao fankalazana ny fetin'ny ray izao koa moa. So welcome back, Gary. Thank you so much again and again. I'm eternally grateful for your sharing. It really opened a lot of, I hope, Malagasy Lutheran people, and not only Lutheran, as I introduced in my question in Malagasy already. Augustine is one of the most important father of the church, since Luther himself, Martin Luther, the founder of the Lutheran theology, was an Augustinian priest. And our new recent elected Pope, the Catholic Pope, also is an Augustinian Pope. So can you share with us one or two of the most important theology of this patristic father that Christians know they should know?
I'm not sure that I can say what are the most important things that Luther taught, that Augustine taught. Augustine was a complicated person, and he was a person of his time and his age. And I had problems with him when I was trying to study him because I couldn't think of him within his own age and what was he responding to. I think it's so important to think about figures from the past within their own context, because sometimes what they were talking about, it's hard for us to understand because we don't understand what they're responding to in their environment. So there were things about Augustine that bothered me. Among them were things like this, that he, in one of his writings, he talks about the joys of the saints in heaven. And among those joys is to watch the sufferings of the damned in hell. I thought that it sounded like somebody who was thinking through something at a kind of intellectual level without really grasping the enormity of what he was saying. Similarly, Augustine is known as the person who originated the doctrine of original sin, which for him meant a corruption of the human spirit that was passed from generation to generation through sexual intercourse. And this caused him and much of the church then to be suspicious of sexual activity because it was associated with the doctrine of original sin. And you could see how there's a lot of talk in early church of lust and as though sexual pleasure was somehow itself tainted and wrong. So this was a problem for me in trying to understand and relate to Augustine, and I wish I had done it more as a disinterested scholar than as a person who actually cared what he said.
Which year actually was Augustine's time?
Let's see, was it around 400? I don't know the exact dates anymore.
Yeah. Araka ny lazainy teo zany isan'ny olona anankiray compliqué be raha ny rain'ny fiangonana ilay antsoina hoe Augustin tany amin'ny 700 taona taorianan'i Jesosy Kristy tany ny nahavelomany dia ny tena nanahirana anazy izy nanao fikarohana momba ny rain'ny fiangonana Augustin zany dia sarotra be taminy nametraka anazy tao anatin'ny tontolo nisy azy sy hoe inona moa ilay tena zavatra notoeriny tamin'ny vaninandro ny ainany io ka nahatonga n'ilay teolojian'ny Augustin zany ho lasa sarotra be taminy nanao fandinihana sy fikarohana momba anazy. Ray amin'ireo soratra izay nataony Augustin ireo izy dia momba ny hoe falika izy isan'ny zavatra niteneniny Augustin ka nanahirana anazy zany izy dia ilay filazana Augustin hoe tena faly ireo olo-masina any an-danitra rehefa mahita an'ireo olona voaheloka any amin'ny hafa be zany. Dia hozy izy hoe ohatrany tsy dia zany loatra angamba ny voalazan'ny soratra masina fa n'Andriamanitra raha tsy faly noho ny fahafatesany ratsy fanahy fa mety hoe zavatra ara-tsaina fotsiny no tiany Augustin tenenina an'izany araka ny fahazahoany azy. Dia isan'ny teolojia mampalaza indrindra ny Augustin koa zany ny amin'ny resaka hoe fahotana ilay hoe original sin. Amin'ny rehefa mianatra amin'ny teny anglisy frantsay moa zany misy fahasamihafan'ny ilay hoe original sin, ilay hoe fahotana voalohany nataony Adama sy Eva sy ilay hoe fahotana ataontsika ankehitriny sy ilay hoe ota hozy itsika malagasy zay. Dia araka ny famaritany Augustin hozy izy dia ny fahalotoan'ny fiainam-panahy. Ilay fanahy koa amintsika malagasy fanazavana omeko manokana zany tia mbola samy hafa koa zany na amin'ny teny grika ary ilay hoe soma sy ilay hoe fanahy sy ilay hoe maolona ilay fanahy masina zany sy ilay hoe ilay fanahin'Andriamanitra sy ilay fanahy maha-olombelona. Ka ilay niresahany Augustin eto zany dia hoe ilay fanahy maha-olombelona hozy izy no simba ary io no isan'ny apita tamina fiangonana taloha fahiny zany mieritreritra hoe ilay fahotana voalohany nataony Adama sy Eva tao amin'ny saha-edena dia momba ny resaka firaisana ara-nofo, resaka seksualité zany hozy izy. Ka io zany mieritreritra hoe ny fitsiriritana sy ny fijangajangana ilay fahotana voalohany isan'ny teolojian'ny Augustin zany io ka araka ny lazainy moa tamin'ny farany hoe raha mba nanana fotoana kokoa zaho hozy izy afaka nandalina nisy kokoa dia nanirina anao an'izay fa tsy nanohy an'izay moa zany izy araka ny fitantarana teo dia izay zany no azony zaraina mahakasika ny Augustin. Fa isan'ny noresahany teo koa moa zany ireo fiangonana Loterana samihafa nisy anazy taty Amerika. Mety sahirana ihany antsika mieno hoe inona daholo ara zany. Za koa mbola tany Madagasikara na tamin'izaho efa tao amin'ny Fédération Luthérienne Mondiale aza dia mieritreritra hoe mizara roa fotsiny ilay Loterana eran-tany misy an'ilay hoe conservateur antsoina hoe miaraka amin'ny Misionery dia misy an'ilay hoe libéral ilay miaraka amin'ny LCA. Fa ararotintsika koa zany amin'izao fananantsika nazy zao anazava hoe nanahoana tsara moa ny fiandohan'ny Fiangonana Loterana taty Amerika dia ahoana ilay niforonan'ilay hoe Missouri sy ilay LCA. So I explained my question in Malagasy first. Since you talked about different denominations of Lutheran churches in America, I myself used to think like all the conservative churches are with Missouri and all the liberal churches are with ELCA. So if you can give us like a general historical background on how Lutheran churches were formed in the American states, or how was it in the beginning to have now all of these, about more than 40 denominations of Lutheran churches in America, as far as I know.
I think 13.
Uh-huh.
So there were, okay, are we still recording? Are we still recording?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, I think originally there were a large number, I think around 13 national churches that were founded by missionaries from the different Lutheran countries. So there were actually 2 Danish churches. There were, I think, 2 Norwegian. There was a Swedish church. There were a couple of different German churches. One of the earliest was the United Lutheran Church, which was in Pennsylvania, very early during the first years of the United States. So one of their members, Muhlenberg, I think, was a member of, he might have been Secretary of State or something like that. So those 13 different denominations, including at that time the Missouri Synod, which was one of the German congregations, they were still teaching at the seminary in German in the 1920s. Anyway, slowly those denominations began to merge. And they had distinctive characteristics. Some were more moralistic than others. Some were more orthodox. I mean, they, like the Missouri Synod, was much more kind of orthodox in its thinking. Some were more pietistic than others, but they merged together slowly to form then the big 3, which were the American Lutheran Church, which was largely German, but also Norwegian and Danish, actually, to come to think of it. One of the Danish churches joined with them, and one of the other Danish churches joined with what became the LCA, the Lutheran Church in America, which was German, Swedish, Danish, and I don't know if they had a Norwegian thing, but anyway, so these national churches amalgamated to become basic churches. So the Missouri Synod never joined with anyone. There's a story, by the way, that was told that there was a conference at which representatives of the ALC, the ELC, and the Missouri Synod were present. And one person said, "I'm a member of the ELC about to be swallowed up by the ALC." And another person said, "I'm from the ULC and I'm about to be swallowed up by the LCA." And the Missouri Synod person got up and said, "I'm from the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and we're not about to be swallowed up by anybody." So in all of these churches, in comparison with the American Protestantism, they were all fairly conservative by comparison. The LCA was more liberal than the ALC, and the ALC was much, much more liberal than the Missouri Synod. But they were, in comparison with others, they were fairly conservative. And they also didn't represent the mainstream of Protestantism. In fact, sometimes they didn't want to be called Protestants. They thought they were a confessional movement within the church. And yeah, they thought of themselves as sort of special, I guess. So they often weren't part of interdenominational groupings. I think it took them probably a longer time to join the National Council of Churches, for example. So they were distinctive because of their liturgy. I think they were a highly educated church. The clergy they all had graduate degrees. That was not true of some of the other denominations of Protestants. And regardless of what one might think about the theology of the various denominations, the members certainly thought of their churches as quite wonderful. It didn't matter whether you were Missouri or LCA or ALC. People loved their church. And there were many in the Missouri Synod that were just lovely, kind, generous people, including the clergy. It didn't matter what they were thinking, it's how they lived. And there was love. So that's an interesting feature. You can look from the outside and say, oh, they have I don't like their theology. But when you get underneath it, you find the people are just people and they're there because they love one another.
Yeah. Raha fitiniko zany le fanazavany rehetrarehetra teo ampiko ny fanazavako sy fahazahoako anazy koa amin'ny kontekstintsika malagasy ny Fiangonana Loterana Amerikana zany ozy izy rehefa lasa United States of America zany hoe lasa nation anankiray zany ireo État 10 dia niforona avy amina fiangonana 13 samihafa koa. Le national zany io nisy ozy izy tao misy fiangonana danois 2 samihafa, nisy fiangonana norvéziana 2 samihafa, nisy swedish zany hoe avy any Suède, suédois, ary nisy fiangonana loterana allemand nisy karazany be dia be zany dia iray tamin'ireo fiangonana allemand ireo zany ilay Misionery. Dia tany amin'ny taona 1970 tany ozy izy ireo mpikambana ny Misionery taty Amerika ireo zany sady mbola mampianatra any amin'ny seminaire any Alemana ihany. Dia nisy koa raha ozy izy tany Pennsylvania isan'ny voalohany fiangonana loterana nitambatra tena hoe any Amerikana zany taty Amerika, ilay antsoina hoe United Lutheran Church. Io zany no nitambatra voalohany, tsy misaratsaraka araka an'ilay fiteny intsony. Zany hoe tsy mitovy tamin'ny antsika tany Madagasikara zany ny fiforonan'ny fiangonana loterana taty Amerika. Ny antsika dia hoe ny norvéziana ihany aloha ny tonga tany. Dia rehefa tonga ny Amerikana dia miara-miasa izy roa, zany hoe ny NMS, ilay misiona norvéziana sy ny misiona Amerikana, tsy nisaratsaraka hoe samy namorona fiangonana ho azy ohatrany taty Amerika fa nitambatra ho fiangonana loterana malagasy ray ihany zany ny antsika tany Madagasikara. Fa ny taty Amerika tena samy nanana ny azy, samy tamin'ny fiteniny, ny teny danois ny sasany, ny teny norvéziana ny sasany, ny teny suédois ny sasany, ny teny allemand ny sasany, fa rehefa nitambatra ho État zany États-Unis zay vao niteny anglisy amin'izay ny fiangonana loterana taty Amerika. Dia teo amin'izay vao teraka ilay fiangonana loterana anankitelo samihafa aty Amerika, ilay antsoina hoe American Lutheran Church, ilay nitambarany allemand sy norvéziana sy danois, ireo koa ny mbola miara-miasa amin'ny fiangonana loterana Madagasikara, sy ilay hoe Lutheran Church in America ny LCA zany le lazainy teo. Io indray ary zareo suédois sy danois sy norvéziana koa no nitambatra tao. Dia i Misionery zany no tsy nitambatambatra tamin'izaniza mihitsiny. Dia nisy tantara anankiray moa notantarainy teo hoe rehefa niara-ny voro izy ireo fiangonan-dehibe nasionaly anankitelo ireo dia ilay membran'ilay fiangonana anankiroa samihafa izy rehefa nifampizara hevitra teny dia niteny ary zany mifanaraka tsara amin'ny teolojiko ihany ka ny anareo fa i mizory ihany zany no tena hoe mizingizina maha-confessionnel anazy ihany. Dia nisan'ny mahasamihafa an'ireo fiangonana samihafa ireo izy voalohany aloha ny fidiren'ny atao hoe lafiny moraly sy ny etika zany misy fahasamihafany ny orthodoxia zany hoe ny fitazomana ny fampianaram-pinoana io zany no tena mampatanjaka ny mizory hoe ity ihany ny fampianaram-pinoana tsy azo ozongozonina tsy azo ovaovaina. Dia misy koa moa ilay fiainam-panana ilay fiainana ny pietisme n'ilay fiangonana koa zany misy mahasamihafa n'ireo fiangonana samihafa ireo. Dia isan'ny tena mampiavaka n'ilay mizory ilay misy anazy taloha zany dia ny liturjiany izy zany tsy manaiky atsotsoina hoe protestanta mihitsy fa dia hoe loterana orthodoxe izy ny liturjiany tsy mitapoka mihitsy fa mbola ilay loterana avy any Alemana. Ny pastorany azy tena tsy maintsy mianatra tena hoe mahavita fianarana ambony daholo mihitsy ny lafiny teolojia zany fa ny itovizan'izy rehetrarehetra kosa nefa ozy izy raha mitazana avy ety ivelany ianao izy dia mety mieritreritra hoe tena mifanipaka mihitsy zany teolojian'ireto fiangonana Loterana Amerikana reto zany. Fa rehefa tena miditra ao anatiny ianao izy mijery an'ilay kristianina dia hitanao fa samy mankafy anazy ry zareo ilay fitiavana no lehibe indrindra tena izay mihitsy moa ny teneniny teo hoe samy olona be fitiavana sy mifankatia daholo zany ry zareo amin'ny denomination zareo tsirairay avy. I hope I have translated it right. So that was a very important information since the Malagasy Lutheran Church now is working both with ELCA and Misionery Church. And as you said, looking from outside, we don't go deeply on these theological discussions, but we usually have a kind of negative identity of each one of them, especially about the ELCA. We usually think about ELCA is the most liberal. So once we think about ELCA, it's about LGBTQI and female ordination. And Misionery is the most orthodox against women ordination, against LGBTQI+. So can you give us kind of how was it when you joined the Liberal Lutheran Church, and how is it exactly inside from your experience?
Yes. Well, the labels that we put on different denominations don't reflect the diversity within those denominations. I think that's the important point, that there are members of the ELCA that are more like some members of the Missouri Synod. In other words, the denomination tends to have a certain posture, let's say, and at that level, that's what people on the outside see when they look at that denomination. It looks like a single thing. But in fact, there's great diversity within the ELCA and within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. There are many Lutheran Missouri Synod pastors that could perfectly well function in the ELCA happily. And they don't even agree with everything in the official position of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The same would be true in the ELCA. There are undoubtedly pastors that don't agree with some of the positions of the ELCA, its official positions, and there are certainly many members who don't agree. Somebody told me the other day, I don't know if this is correct or not, but someone told me, who should know, that about 50% of the ELCA members voted for Donald Trump for president. That is astounding, given what we imagine the ELCA to be like. probably the way people think and believe is more related to their cultural context than it is to the church that they belong to. Because a rural American tends to be more conservative than an urban American. So those churches in Idaho, in Wyoming, in the middle of the country, the way that they think and talk about their belief is probably quite different from the way we do here in Berkeley or in California, in the coastal areas of California. So you mentioned the LGBTQ issue, and remember that the ELCA and its predecessor church bodies had years and years of struggling with that issue before they finally voted only in 2009 to accept same-sex marriage of gay or lesbian pastors. And when they did it, they made clear that this did not mean that an individual congregation must accept a gay or lesbian pastor. They really, in order to get a majority opinion of the church, they had to say it's left to your own conscience to decide how you want to think about this. Yes, our official position is this way, but you as an individual, we leave it to your conscience to decide. That's how they were able to get an approval. And so it's not as though because there are a number of now, of course, well, no, I should go back. There always have been gay and lesbian pastors. They just weren't known to be gay. They weren't out. Now in the ELCA, they can be out, but there still aren't a great number of them. And they themselves know that they're probably limited in the congregations that will accept them, because Americans are divided on this issue, even within the ELCA. So it's a much more complex thing than just stereotypes that we can have about other denominations.
That was so important. Thank you. Nametraka fanontaniana aminazy amin'izay moa zany zaho hoe raha ny fijeriny aty ivelany ary isan'ny namafisiny tamin'ny fanazavana teo dia mieritreritra hoe ny Misionery de conservative dia tsy manaiky ny ordinasiona ny vehivavy, tsy manaiky ny fanaovana ordinasiona ny olona manambady olona mitovy fitaovam-pananana aminy. Dia ny LCA indray dia ny mifanohitra amin'izay, manaiky ny ordinasiona ny vehivavy, manaiky ny ordinasiona n'ireo LGBTQIA ireo. Fa araka ny nazavainy teo zany fijery tsotra kely avy ety ivelany fotsiny izay ozy izy ka tsy tena milaza marina ny fahasamihafana ao anatiny amin'ny mampikambana tamin'ireo fiangonana anankiroa ireo anazy. Rehefa tena miditra any amin'ny rafitra ny fiangonana anao izy dia mahita fa tsy hoe anankiray mitovy daholo ny toe-tsain'ny mpikambana isaky ny fiangonana tsirairay amin'ireo denomination samihafa ireo. Betsaka zany ozy izy ny pastora Misionery na dia tsy mitovy hevitra tanteraka amin'ny fanapahan-kevitra ny LCA no afaka miara-miasa aminy. Dia ohatran'izay kosa izy ny pastora ny LCA tsy mitovy hevitra amin'ny fanapahan-kevitra rehetrarehetra raisin'ny Misionery izay manaiky ny teolojiany. Dia isan'ny ohatra mivaingana ny raisiny zany satria io izy tsy resaka anaram-piangonana fotsiny amin'ny Loteriana ihany zany, fa ny Amerikanina ray manontolo mihitsiny no tsy mitovy hevitra ny amin'ny resaka hoe toeran'ny vehivavy sy ny resaka fifanambadiany mitovy fananana. Tamin'ny fifidianana farany teo zao izy araka ny statistika ny 50 isan-jato zany hoe ny atsasaky ny membre ny LCA ilay antsoina hoe LK mazatra antsika, ny atsasaky ny mpikambany amin'ny LK izy izay azo lazaina eritreretiny maro hoe manaiky an'ilay LGBTQ dia nifidy an'i Donald Trump izay tena manohitra tanteraka an'io resaka fanambadiany mitovy fananana io. Dia araka ny fahitany azy zany tsy ilay fiangonana misy an'ilay olona no tena mamaritra ny fanekeny sy fandavany resaka ordinasiona ny vehivavy sy ny fiarahany mitovy fananana fa ny toerana misy azy. Isany ohatra ny raisiny teo zao ny any ambanivohitra ozy izy tsy any amin'ireo État atao hoe conservateur ohatran'ny hoe Ohio zany raisiny ohatra teo dia tsy mitovy mihitsy amin'ilay toerana misy anay roa aty Californie, indrindrandrindra zany zahay aty amin'ny sisiny amoron-dranomasiny Bay Area sy Berkeley zao ozy izy dia izay zany ilay tena mamaritra ny toe-tsaina sy ny teolojia ny akamaroan'ny olona fa tsy ilay anaran'ny fiangonana loatra. Ary isany nazavainy teo fa na ny LCA izay manaiky an'io fanambadiany mitovy fananana io izy dia nandalo taona maro be, lava be ny ady hevitra, zay vao tamin'ny taona 2005 vao nanaiky hoe azo atao ordinasiona ny pastora manambady olona mitovy fananana aminy. Nefa ozy izy tsy hoe tsy maintsy manaiky an'io koa ny fiangonan'ny LCA rehetrarehetra fa apetraka amin'ny conscience-n'ilay komity sy ny pastoran'ny fiangonana tsirairay zany hoe hanaiky ve izy sa tsy hanaiky fa tsy misy fanerena ozy izy. Ary namafisiny teo koa fa ny pastora sy ny mpitondra fiangonana manambady olona mitovy fananana aminy ozy izy dia efa nisy foana hatramin'izay taty Amerika fa tamin'ny 2009 io zany vao natao hoe tena reconnu amin'ny fifidianany isam-bato maro anisa ny fanekenana azy fa tsy midika zay hoe rehefa mizory rehetrarehetra dia manohitra daholy na rehefa LCA rehetrarehetra dia manaiky daholy. Thank you.
If I could say one more thing about this, I think that we like to imagine that we get our ideas about things like as Christians, we get our ideas about, should women be ordained or is it okay to be gay or lesbian? Is that wrong or is it okay? I think we imagine that we get those ideas from reading the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we really get those ideas from our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And we read into the Bible what our culture is telling us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that clergy can sometimes influence our perception of the Bible, but there are even limits to that where people will, I think, for example, that people are more likely to believe that the Bible is telling them that it's wrong to be gay or lesbian if they've never met a person who's gay or lesbian. As soon as they begin to meet them and know them as human beings, it begins to shift their understanding of the Bible. And it doesn't seem so obvious anymore that the Bible is condemning these people.
Dia nampino koa moa zany ilay fanazavany teo araka n'ilay efa nilazainy teo foana hoe matetika ozy izy ny hevitra sy ny teolojian'ny olona momba ny hoe ordinasiona ny vehivavy sy ny ordinasiona ny olona manambady olona mitovy fananana aminy dia tsy dia avy amin'ny famakiany sy ny fahazahoan'ny Baiboly loatra fa avy amin'ny kolotsaina sy ny zava-misy iainany any amin'ny fiarahamonina. Marina ozy izy fa misy fiatraikany amin'ny fisainan'ny olona izay zavatra tenenin'ny pasteur sy ny mpitondra fiangonana fa indrindrandrindra ho any Amerikanina zany araka ny teniny teo dia vitsy ihany no mino hoe fahotana ny fanambadiany mitovy fananana satria miainga avy amin'ny fifandraisany amin'ireo olona ireo zany ozy izy no famaritany an'ilay foto-kevitra ijoroany sy ny teolojiany fa tsy dia tena hoe miainga avy amin'ny Baiboly loatra. Yeah, that is one of the cultural difference actually. Like in Madagascar, for example, in the Malagasy Lutheran Church, we assume that what we believe comes from our understanding of the Bible. And it's still easy for us to reject all of these new progressive theological understanding. But it's not yet that much part of our social life. And
we're really in a conversation with the Bible.
Yeah.
And it's a new conversation when it's a new situation. So Luther was reading the Bible as a German in late medieval, early Renaissance period and understanding it through those eyes. And so he came up with ideas, some of which were awful. His views of Jews were very anti-Semitic. Well, it was the culture of the time. It's understandable that he would have those views, but he didn't get them from the Bible. He read it into the Bible.
Yeah.
And we do the same thing. All of us do that, actually. We don't like to admit it, but we're all doing it all the time.
Yeah. I confirm that, because when I started to get interested in Luther's theology about women, especially related to female ordination, I confirmed what you said. Like, that was not an issue during Luther's time, and Luther's stand about his theology about a lot of things, but he never really mentioned, like, I am accepting female ordination, for example.
Right.
That was not an issue of his time at all. And yeah, but I would like to translate what you said before we go to the next and final conclusion of this second interview, which is already about 35 minutes now. And I will let you conclude before we go to the next one, if you are still willing to share.
Sure, go ahead.
And we will go back to your personal experience again.
Okay.
Yeah. Araka ny fifampizarana teo zany dia na Lutera aza ozy izy dia tsy azo lazaina mihitsy hoe avy amin'ny fandinian'ny Baiboly fotsiny ihany ny teolojia Loterana ny rehetrarehetra. Ary ny teolojia Loterana koa dia mivoatra araka ny vanim-potoana sy toerana misy ny tsirairay. Izany hoe amin'izao fotoana izao zany dia amin'ny fomba hafa mihitsy ny fomba fiinterpretena ny Baiboly sy ny fahazahoana izay lazainy satria niova ilay tontolo, niova ilay contexte, niova ny fotoana, dia mifanaraka amin'izay koa zany ny fanaovan'ny olona dialogue sy fandinihana ny soratra masina arakaraka ny zava-misy amin'ny contexte. Dia izay moa zany nazavaiko anazy teo hoe isan'ny tena mahasamihafa ny Fiangonana Loterana aty Amerika sy ny any Madagasikara koa zao mbola mora kely amin'ny fiangonana kristianina ankamaroany any Madagasikara zao ny mandany io resaka fanambadiana mitohy fananana io, satria mbola tsy tena zavatra relevant be any amintsika io. Karitra koa zay tao anatin'ny fandinihako ny hoe ny teolojian'ny Lotera manoloana ny ordinasiona ny vehivavy Lotera tenany dia mbola tsy niteny mihitsy ny hoe manaiky ny ordinasiona ny vehivavy satria tsy fanontaniana nipetraka tamin'ny vaninandro ny ainany akory aza zany, fa mbola resaka samy pretra sy samy lehilahy no resahan'ny Lotera mivantana, fa ny contexte taty aoriana sy ny teolojia Loterana taty aoriana zany vao manomboka miresaka an'izany hoe ordinasiona ny vehivavy sy resaka hoe fanambadiana mitohy fananana zany. Dia araka ny lazaiko teo faranantsika indray ty fifampizarana faharoa ty dia ometsika anazy ny fitenenana hamarina azy indray. Yeah, so the floor is yours to conclude this second interview.
What would be a good way to end? What would be your suggestion?
From what we have shared and your own experience, what would you say about the Lutheran theology related to this, what we have shared?
Okay. All right. I think the issue is how we want to think about our faith in the context of the Bible. And I think there are people who believe that, you look in the Bible for answers to almost every question of life. And so it's a kind of a handbook that teaches us the answers to all the different questions that we have about morality and how to live. Everything is answered in the Bible. But maybe that's not true. Maybe the Bible is a collection of writings that help us to grasp a kind of central idea. And that idea is something about the truth of our brokenness as human beings, of our fallibility, our frailty, our tendency to make mistakes, and that somehow, despite all of that, God accepts us. And you could, in traditional terms, forgives us. That God cares about us and is delighted in us despite our imperfection, and that we are not expected to be perfected. And so what this means, this is called the gospel thrust. This is the gospel core of what the Bible has to say. And what that does is, because we no longer have to be absorbed with ourselves and fears about our status, we're free then to care for others. And that's where our care for the environment, for other people, for loving people that are our neighbors or those that are far away, that's based upon the sense that we don't have to focus in on ourselves and worry about our own situation before God. That, to me, is the core of what the Bible is telling us. And that all this other stuff is peripheral, is secondary, and you could say open to discussion.
Yeah, thank you. That's a beautiful way to to close this second interview. Araka ny lazainy teo zany a, satria nangatako zany izy hoe ahoana zany no amaranantsika sy amehezantsika n'izay resaka rehetrarehetra momba ny fahasamihafana teolojia zay a, dia araka ny lazainy teo hoe ny Baiboly izy araka ny fahazahoany anazy a, dia tsy hoe hitadiavana ny valiteny amin'ny fanontanianao rehetrarehetra eo amin'ny fiainanao, fa ny Baiboly izy dia fitambarana boky izay milaza aminao ny hevitra fototra hoe ny olombelona rehetrarehetra dia mpanota tsy tonga lafatra, fa Andriamanitra kosa dia manaiky sy mamindra fo any olombelona rehetrarehetra io. Dia aminy zany ny fototry ny filazantsara hozy izy dia tsy ilay atsika sahirana momba ny tenantsika sy ny fahotantsika loatra, fa ilay isika miasa ho an'ny hafa. Zany hoe mitia sy mikarakara ny olombelona sy ny tontolo iainana, io zany aminy no tena hoe foto-kevitra lehibe ao amin'ny Baiboly, fa tsy ilay hoe miondrika amin'ny fahotantsika sy ny fahalenantsika ihany. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to continue our sharing about your own story in the next interview.
Thank you.